BookTube, it's Amy. It's been a minute or two, hasn't it? I am still continuing to read Proust, but I have read a couple of other books as well. The main one I want to talk about here is Balzac's Cousin Bette, that I listened to on audiobook over the Easter long weekend. And I spent maybe 40 minutes on Sunday morning taking a walk with my headphones in and beginning that book, and I spent quite literally, and I mean literally, all of Monday either sitting outdoors with a cup of tea or lying in bed just listening to that audiobook and finishing it because it was that good that I just wanted to plow right through. Now, that's one that I obviously haven't read before, and I don't own a hard copy of it, but it's one that I've wanted to read for several years. In fact, I think Balzac is an author that I've neglected a fair bit. I read 5 or 6 years back my very first Balzac, which I believe was a provincial in Paris or something along those lines. It's one of his much lesser known ones because I had picked up an old hardback from which I've since learned is a complete set of his human comedy. There is this complete set at a used bookstore and it's been sitting there for over a year, but they want, I think, $125 for the whole set, which is a reasonable price, and I would possibly pay it just to have those, but it is like quite a lot of books, and I always come back to the thought of how do I get those home on the bus with me, because they are heavy hardcovers, and there is, I think, around 20 of them on that shelf. I've never looked to see if it's the complete set, but they are something that I gaze at now and then. But returning to Cousin Bette. So Cousin Bette is one of his later novels, and by far one of his most famous novels. And interestingly enough, as I read it, I could see elements in Cousin Bette that perhaps influenced later writers like Flaubert. For instance, there's a scene in Cousin Bette with an older woman who offers herself up to a rich gentleman in return for money to save her husband. And we see a very similar scene in Flaubert's Sentimental Education, which is a novel that I also love. But so the basic plot of this is that we have a family, the Hulots. We have Hector and Adeline. Adeline is the wife, Hector is the husband, and they have a daughter, Hortense, who is described as fairly beautiful. She's certainly a lot more beautiful than their cousin Bette. She is considered an old maid, although she's only in, I believe, her late 20s or her early 30s at this point. And the backstory for these two cousins is that when they were young, because Adeline was the prettier of the two girls, she is the one who got the fine clothes and was kept indoors, and the parents kind of set their cap hoping that a wealthy man would come by and see her and marry her, and this in fact happened. But Cousin Bette was the one who had the cheaper clothes, the one who was out working to help sustain the family, working in the fields and whatnot. But Adeline, after she is married, thinks she is doing her cousin a favor and brings Cousin Bette to Paris, to the city, to live in the grand house with her husband and eventually her children. She has a son who is already married by the time this novel opens, and the daughter Hortense, who is unmarried and we discover that a potential engagement has just been broken off because the man in question asked around and discovered that it was very unlikely that his future father-in-law would actually have the financial resources to pay that, I think it's a 20,000 franc dowry. So the potential suitor sees that there's no money coming and drops Hortense. And so Adeline is very, very worried about whether her daughter is going to be married at all. She kind of sees this as her last wish in life. She's had a very tough life because her husband is, let's just say he's an asshole. He is constantly cheating on her and squandering their fortune on these other women to the point where Adeline's life is completely ruined and she finds herself on the edge of poverty in this novel. But Cousin Bet has a friend. She has established herself. She's turned down several offers of marriage out of pride, it seems. She doesn't want to marry someone who wants her only because she is the relation of her rich relation's husband. She wants to be loved and wanted for herself, which I find it funny in this sense that Cousin Bet is often described in descriptions of this novel as a shrew. She's not going to marry just for the sake of marrying. In fact, she has established herself in her own rented apartment. It's not as fancy as those of Adeline and Hector, but she has established herself in this rented apartment. She has established herself as a seamstress and a weaver, I believe. She is doing embroidery and clothing and that sort of thing. And so she is very much taking care of herself, but she has become entangled with an artist who is almost 10 years her junior. This is Wenceslas Steinbock, who is in fact a count. He has fled his own country after the fall of the nobility. I don't know the details of the history there, but he finds himself in Paris, ready to commit suicide, impoverished in this tiny room in the attic where Cousin Bet lives, and she goes in and stops his suicide attempt and essentially looks after him and kind of encourages him in his art. But then she becomes also very possessive, and even though she describes herself in a motherly role to him, she is very much in love with Wenceslas, which is why she is so enraged when he is taken away from her by a younger woman. And so she sets out with the help of Valerie Marneffe, who is the mistress of Hector. She sets out with Valerie Marneffe to get revenge, and so Cousin Bet is essentially a revenge story, and it is positively delightful to read about. It is society at its worst. So I read that, but then I also read a horror novel. This is Prissy by Clifford Hanley, and it was borderline crap. You definitely cannot believe that this is a 14-year-old girl. Her thought patterns are too mature and also too complex for a 14-year-old girl. She's not concerned about the things that 14-year-old girls would be concerned about. It's essentially the story of a prime minister's daughter who is kidnapped, and her chauffeur is kidnapped as well, and she sets out to not only rescue them both, but get revenge on her kidnappers through a series of deaths that seemingly appear to be accidents. Good potential, but it was just a little bit on the ridiculous side. It seems odd to say, but I was hoping for something a little bit more realistic. I was hoping as well for the emotional aspects of this to be brought in, because the emotional aspects of what kidnapping and killing people would be like are completely missing, and even her parents seem to be lacking that emotional aspect. As well, the villains seemed a little bit two-dimensional. But then I read an even piece of bigger crap, which is Offerings by T.M. Minton. Enslaved by bloodlust, they sacrificed their victims to a nameless god. Almost immediately, I didn't know what the hell was going on here, because in the opening scene, we get 3 women at the airport, and you're not sure who's who because they all behave almost the same, and you're switching perspectives, and so you're asking yourself, okay, which women is which? Who's going on this trip? How are they related to each other? And it takes you a couple of chapters to actually figure out who was who in that first scene. And then, of course, a couple of characters go off to this island somewhere, and they get murdered and kidnapped, and it's this really weird scene where this half monkey, half human creature ties up this woman so that she can be raped by a whole bunch of apes in the hope that she will give birth to a woman of their own kind that they can breed with. So I'm gonna leave it there. I kind of skimmed to the end to figure out how it ended. There is a character named Lucy who is revealed to have feelings for her roommate who is kidnapped, and when the other characters escape from the beach at the end, they just sort of leave Lucy with her friend's dead body. Lucy's still alive. She's just kind of left there. They don't worry about helping her get to the boat. So that was a hot mess. But I'm still reading Proust as well. I am on Sodom and Gomorrah, a little over halfway through here, and I have to say I'm not enjoying this quite as much as the earlier volumes. In this volume, our narrator is definitely departing from the innocence of the earlier volumes. We have more talk about the Dreyfus affair. We have the narrator's realization that homosexuality exists. We have him dealing with the death of his grandmother finally, and we start to see more of a dark side of society. And if I had to sum up this volume so far in one phrase, it would be the narrator's realization that homosexuality is a thing, because he realizes that M. de Charlus, who he has had encounters with, is a gay man and is having affairs with various young men that he encounters. In fact, our narrator is actually peeping through a window at one point when he sees M. de Charlus having a rendezvous with one of his lovers. And he also discovers that, or suspects, that Albertine, who he has reconnected with, she has reappeared in his life in this volume as a lover. He suspects that she is either in a relationship of some sort or in love with her friend Andre, who we also met in an earlier volume. And he suspects her, but seeing as she also flirts with men, it doesn't occur to him that she could be attracted to both men and women. And so he finds himself very jealous and also angry, but at the same time, he believes that he has her. He believes that Albertine is his. And I have to wonder a little bit about Albertine here, though, because when he first met her in Volume 2 and Within a Budding Grove, when he was with his grandmother at Baalbek, she didn't seem to be all that interested in him as more than a friend. And that was before he began to climb in society, so to speak. But by the time he reconnects with her, the end of the previous volume and the beginning of Sodom and Gomorrah, he is dining in pretty decent society, and so as a reader, I wonder what his new social position, what effect that has had on Albertine's attraction for him, because she also flirts heavily with Saint Loup in a scene I read recently, and almost completely ignores our narrator. He's a little bit confused, and he doesn't really buy Albertine's explanation for this scene. So we get the sense that she has very much her own motives here. So I'm enjoying this volume, not as much as the previous volumes, but enough so that I will certainly be finishing. I'm about 500 pages in here. And I'll probably check in again with all of you after I finish this volume. So 200, about 300 pages from now, whenever that will be. Yeah, so that is what I have been up to, what I have been reading lately. Let me know how your reading is progressing this weekend in the comments below.